How would you fancy managing FC United across Europe?
While Manchester United may not be in Europe for the second half of this season, FC United still are.
It's probably the friendliest competitive football competition in the world.
Hello, producer Seb here. I just want to grab your attention for a couple of minutes before this week's midweek edition of the Manchester's Red podcast with Samuel Luckhurst and Steven Railston. At the end of this episode, there is a 12-minute feature that myself and Tyrone shot last week at FC United. FC United are in the Phoenix Trophy, which is a European competition for community and non-league clubs with a reason to be in it. It's not just the big teams qualifying, there's a story behind every single participant. Thank you for watching, and I'll now hand you over to Steven and Samuel.
Hello and welcome to the midweek edition of the Manchester is Red podcast. My name is Steven Railston, I'm your host. I'm joined by Samuel Luckhurst for this episode, and today we're going to have a look at Dan Ashworth and his impending move to Manchester United, get into a bit of Kylian Mbappe transfer news and look at how that might affect Marcus Rashford, who has had previous interest from PSG. And at the back end of the podcast, we'll look at some academy bits because there was a mini Manchester derby on Monday night. But before we do that, Samuel, how are you? Did you have a good weekend and your trip to Luton?
I'm not bad, thank you. Very well. I was actually wondering if you were right, Stephen. You don't sound as chirpy as you normally do, but maybe I'm reading too much into it, or maybe it's these gigantic headphones that I'm having to wear because I've mislaid my AirPods.
See, whenever I have a heavy weekend on the beers, Samuel, my voice, it takes a little while to recover, I think. I don't sound as chipper. I come down with illness, I think. That's my excuse. But it was my birthday the weekend, Samuel.
It's the Marcus Rashford tribute from yourself
again.
Yeah.
But as you can imagine, I celebrated appropriately across Friday and Saturday and had an easy one on Sunday afternoon with a family meal, etc. So that was nice. But football news anyways, Samuel. Dan Ashworth, massive news coming from the northeast and down to the northwest. He's obviously now being placed on gardening leave. I mean, you wrote in December that Ashworth was INEOS's prime target, and you just reminded me of what I said on one of the previous podcasts, but we'll not give that a mention. But that's it. That is the next step to Ashworth officially joining the club. And look, Newcastle are going to play hardball negotiations, aren't they? Because at the end of the day, their sporting director he's about to be poached.
Yeah, I think the posturing is inevitable and also understandable. They will do their utmost to drive a hard bargain, but I suspect that when it comes to the small print of Ashworth's contract and the legal matters that come into these things, I think it will be very, very difficult for Newcastle to demand 10 million from United for him, never mind this 20 million figure that's been touted and is probably quite fanciful as well. The way these things work out, whenever as a sporting director gone for that amount of money, it's not as simple as saying, well, United paid 80 million or 80 odd million for Anthony. Do you not think that they should be spending a similar amount to that for Dan Ashworth? It just doesn't work out that way. United want Ashworth. Ashworth wants to go to United. And obviously after that story initially came out last week, I think it was Luke Edwards who did the line about Newcastle fearing that Ashworth might go. And then I was fortunately able to get the steer that he actually wants the United role, and United aren't even considering anyone else. It's just all on Dan Ashworth. They're that impressed with him. He's got a relationship there with Sir Dave Brailsford that goes back a number of years. I think those were his words, not mine either. Ashworth said that when Brailsford made that presentation to Newcastle before the start of last season.
Newcastle's official communication described him as a close friend and associate of Dan Ashworth, and as you said, that was almost a Trojan horse, wasn't it? Getting Sir Dave Brailsford to come in and speak to Newcastle players, yeah.
Yeah, I'm surprised they've not deleted the tweet yet. Maybe it's one of those that hasn't amassed too many retweets yet. A la Omar Barada's musings on United when he was on the other side at City, and his search history on Twitter was obviously dragged up by plenty of supporters. But with this, I think it's kind of played out as expected so far. Whenever there's a big move between clubs, I think the Brighton sporting director has been placed on gardening leave as well today, because it looks like he's about to become the latest to move to Chelsea. Gardening leave is something that happens. It happened. I think the first time I heard the phrase was when Peter Kenyon left Manchester United, where he was the chief executive, to join Chelsea, and this was about 2 or 3 months into the Abramovich era, and of course here's a new era under INEOS at United, and they're making some very ambitious moves. They've already taken Barada from City. He's going to serve his period of gardening leave and then start in the summer. And with Ashworth, I think time is very much of the essence, because of course there's a transfer window coming up. All summer transfer windows are important, but this one especially so for United, where you've got new investors coming in and overseeing the football operations. Are they able to get Ashworth in time, so that he's able to oversee recruitment? Because it's around this time of year that you're not compiling your short list of players, of targets for the summer. You have compiled them by now. That was what United were preaching 4 or 5 years ago, that come January, by the end of it, they would have settled on their list of targets, and then it'd be a case of going out and trying to execute the deals, speaking to the player's agent, touching base with the club, and trying to put the framework into place for signing these players.
How fun must gardening leave be? I mean, he's still getting paid. And I mean, he's not literally tending to his garden, is he, Samuel? Dan Ashworth's not going to be plucking out planting flowers. Yeah, so in Manchester, it's not very nice at the moment. And Barada's obviously enjoying his, well, I hope he's enjoying his spell of gardening leave. We don't get it in journalism, do it? It'd be quite interesting if we did.
No. It's I think in a way, it probably, I think a lot of people, you may find it as well, that when you've got a lot of time on your hands and nothing to do, it can be quite unsettling. I think a lot of people...
you just rewatched The Sopranos or something like that.
I was doing that around... There wasn't much gardening to do even when it was lockdown. But yeah, I was watching a hell of a lot of The Sopranos in between doing the unusual day job as it was back then, when there were 10 weeks without football or whatever it was. Yeah, not the best of times, as we all remember.
Wasn't very fun. No, not at all. In terms of how long it'll actually be, then, I mean, there's been a suggestion it'll be a year minimum. This, I mean, like as you said, 2 years is probably a fanciful suggestion. I guess it relies on negotiations, though. And as I said, Newcastle are going to play a hardball, because at the end of the day, a club have walked in, and let's not forget, they only appointed Dan Ashworth in summer of 2022. I think it was June 2022. I should really know that. It's June or July. Anyways,
I think the deal was done I think the deal with Brighton was announced in the February, and then he started.
Yeah, because he had a period of gardening leave with Brighton himself, of course. But then Newcastle have had this guy poached, who they thought they were going to have at St James's Park for a good few years, but it's clearly not going to be the case.
No, and again, I think it's a statement of intent from INEOS to go for Ashworth, because he is he's possibly the best in class in terms of British.
It was always telling that he was their only target, wasn't it? I mean, it was a statement in itself.
There were the usual names thrown about. Michael Edwards was one that was thrown about. Paul Mitchell was thrown about, because I think he's not even sure he's at Monaco anymore. And of course, it's always like, well, he worked in Monaco, and Jim Ratcliffe lives in Monaco.
I'm not sure. I would think that
interest?
Paul Mitchell actually exists if I didn't see him at a game once. It was Monaco under 21s playing United's under 21s a while back, and he was in the director's box. I remember tweeting it. But he's one of those names that's banded around all the time. I don't think he was there for Rangnick that day, but he has been visible a few times, hasn't he?
Yeah, I think he was start with Rangnick for, it might have been a Youth Cup game that was played at Old Trafford, maybe the quarter-final. I'm not too sure.
He's from Greater Manchester. He's obviously got local links.
Stalybridge. Yeah, exactly. And I think that was what United told me at the time. I don't know who was at the game for us that night, but it would have been someone. But I text someone at United, and they just said, "Oh, he's here seeing family and over for a game, and he knows Rangnick from the previous days, the Red Bull group." So he decided to take that game in. But as I said, I think with these stories, you can always, it's easy to write too much on big issues, and I think the investment by INEOS was an example of it. It was less is more, really. There was so much. There was a lot of dross really written by certain people out there regarding that whole non-takeover, because of course it's the Glazer family are still at Manchester United, and I think with the sporting director role as well, it's it can be like a transfer story. You can say, oh, they want this player, that player, and the other player for this position. They could go for this one and that one or the other, but the only one I've ever heard anything credible about was Ashworth, which was hence why I did the story back in late November or early December, whenever it was. Can't quite remember when. And of course, that's why it was followed up with that line last week. And it got to the point on Friday where United were, privately confirming their interest and their intention to get him, because of course, where INEOS is still not technically on the board yet, it is going to happen this week. But there can still be these not miscommunications, but people at United are not as necessarily as in the loop as people at INEOS, even though they work for Manchester United. So there can be a bit of a time lag there, but it seems like they are all on the same page now, because they obviously have to be. And INEOS, I think maybe in the next matchday programme, there's every chance that Sir Jim Ratcliffe's name will feature on that contents page where it lists the club directors.
Would it be pointless to speculate on the kind of fee that could be paid for Ashworth then? I mean,
I think
good
so.
sporting director's worth 20 million, but I think it's a point to make that it will have an impact on FFP. United have to work within these, obviously, parameters at the moment. Yeah, and then Newcastle as well. Ironically, Dan Ashworth's probably leaving, but one of the reasons he's leaving because they're slightly hamstrung at the moment with FFP. And United, if they're going to pay, let's say, 10-15 million for Ashworth, it could help Newcastle in that regard.
Well, yes, and that was something that United people at United referred to when when obviously they started talking more candidly about Ashworth. It was that they didn't want to sort out Newcastle's FFP problems, and that I've definitely heard that somewhere else from someone who used to work at United. I'm not sure if it might have been about FFP, but it was something financial related and dealing with a club and making life easier for them. And so it's part of a script that they've used before, I think it's fair to say. And they're not just going to say, well, yeah, we'll pay whatever it takes, because look what's happened in recent years when they've paid whatever it takes to get this player, that player, or the other player. More often than not, it's not worked out well. And that's been a stick to beat them with. And clearly, INEOS are going to try and change that culture where they have just frittered so many millions. And of course, it is different with Ashworth because of his clout. It's not just the recruitment; it's the way he's gone about choosing managers. I think it's safe. I think it's fair to say that he would have laid down some groundwork in Brighton getting De Zerbi, because Brighton were absolutely prepared for when Potter went as to who they would go for. And given the
way they actually operate, I think he did an interview with he was technical director of Brighton, wasn't he? And he did an interview with a couple of other members of staff. And the way they actually operate with managers, they've already got a list of 10 managers who could actually succeed the current one. It's fascinating the way they operate. And it's the same with players as well. I mean, their scouting network's unique. And I think that's something huge that Dan Ashworth will improve at Manchester United, is the scouting network. I mean, United have got scouts in every corner of the world, but yeah, you look at the spending record and it's been really, really poor. So that can only improve when he comes on board.
There's no reason why you can't apply the method some of the methods that have been used at Brighton under Ashworth to Manchester United. I know they are very, very different clubs. Brighton have to, in terms of scouting players, there's a specific, there's always going to be a cap on how much they can spend on a player. But that said, when they signed Moises Caicedo, he was a player that United were in for. There were other players, you look at how brilliant they are for Brighton and you think, well, why didn't United go for him? Or what was the United scout on that patch doing to not come across this player? And sometimes I think it was...
well, the answer to that, Samuel, is he wasn't Dutch and he didn't play in the Eredivisie. That's come on, you know that answer.
Well, Rich has said before about, was it Alphonso Davies, and of course there was the infamous Frenkie de Jong and Matthijs de Ligt and Deo Upamecano, these players that were recommended by Derek Langley. So sometimes they are spotting them, but the power brokers are not making the right decisions. So it's clearly going to be a combination. I mean, in researching something the other day, I came across those quotes from Marcel Boots, who somehow stayed on at United as head of global scouting for 6 years, and he was complaining about the politics at the club and how it was a political decision to get rid of him. And I'm thinking, come on, pal, you were Dutch. If anyone was going to stay on at United, it would have been one of the Dutch guys, but they decided to get rid of you because you shouldn't have been there in the first place. Yeah. It was so bizarre that Ed Woodward, who was privately scathing of Louis van Gaal's recruitment and dug out specific players. Two of them, I think it was Morgan Schneiderlin and Daley Blind, as un-United players. And then Marcel Boot was the only surviving member of Louis van Gaal's staff, and he was made head of global scouting. It didn't compute whatsoever, because Boot was the guy who was assisting Van Gaal with recruiting players. They were the two who would essentially make the decision on the players that they should get and who would be ideal for them, and then they'd give the list to Woodward, and Woodward would go off and reach for the moon and end up, as I said, signing Morgan Schneiderlin, who, in fairness, at the time he was seen as quite an astute buy by United, but he turned out to be anything but. But that was just the strange. That was something that none of us could ever work out, and that was a guy who had the title of head of global scouting. I think he popped up every now and then because he's got this quite wild head of grey hair, so he's quite conspicuous if he's a scout going to a game. He's not someone who's going to be incognito. And he did go and watch Haaland when he played. I think it was his last appearance for Red Bull Salzburg. I think he was spotted watching Martin Odegaard play as well when he was in Spain. You can guess who the nationality of the Manchester United manager was at that time, looking at two Norwegian players. And Marcel Boot happens to be clocked watching both of them. But he can complain about all that all he wants. There's definitely been a fundamental problem with the scouting structure at United, and at times there have been two scouts going from United at the same game bumping into each other, and it's just chaotic. There's no organisation there. Why are they both there? And they bump into each other, having met a handful of times at a scouting meeting at Old Trafford. And it's, am I supposed to be here, or are you not supposed to be here? It's, some of them are just also a little bit peculiar. There's one, I think he's still the Eastern European scout, Piotr Sadowski, who did some video chat that was on YouTube. So you can't get a more public video platform than that, around the time of the pandemic, talking about how the transfer window might reopen. And I think AP had written up the quotes, we spotted it, and I ended up writing up the quotes, and then he was on to me asking me to take them down and not quote him, clearly paranoid because he might get in trouble with someone or the other. And in the end he blocked me. I don't know why he's still on the payroll at United. I think he needs to find a different line of work if he's acting like that. It was most unusual, to say the least.
I'm not sure what people expect when they're going on a YouTube video. As you say, it's a very public platform, likely for the press to catch it up. You're leaving yourself to...
That YouTube video is still on YouTube
up as well.
Yeah.
That doesn't surprise us.
But as soon as it gets a bit of prominence, it's, oh God, what am I going to do? Can you please take that down?
Yeah.
Ridiculous behaviour.
We'll leave it there for part one. We'll be back in a moment for part two. Welcome back to part two of the Manchester is Red podcast. Now, Samuel, Kylian Mbappe, how exciting. Who knew he was going to go to Real Madrid? Who knew he was going to leave PSG? Now, he's obviously not officially signing for Los Blancos, but he has told PSG that he's leaving, and inevitably he will go to the Bernabeu, won't he? More on the point of how that actually relates to United. I mean, obviously PSG have shown an interest in Marcus Rashford over the last few years. I mean, I remember that game when Ranić dropped them against Manchester City in, was it March 2022 or April 2022? I think it was March. And Pogba was playing up front and Rashford had enough, and obviously stories came out that he was considering his future. I think that was also the time that his brother was meeting with PSG, etc. But now this season, obviously he's been in and out. His performances have been very mixed after an excellent campaign. And we have talked on this podcast a few times whether it would be best to move Marcus Rashford on. And we have said that this probably is a conversation to be had in the summer. Now, if Mbappe's going to Madrid, that would open a large part of their budget. Could we see PSG making an offer for Marcus Rashford?
What interests me most in this very uninteresting event is how El Chiringuito reacts to it.
Can I just say, I didn't choose to speak about this as well. We get certain guides.
No. I think we've got to give a shout out to that guy. Was it? I think his name was. It might have been Jose Diaz or something like that. But when Mbappe rejected PSG in in 2022, he turned to the camera and he was dead serious. He said, "You'll be a great player, but never a great man." And of course, this great player is about to finally join Real Madrid, which is a club he really should have moved to at least 2 years ago. And it's been in the post for a long, long time. He has, I'd hesitate to say he's wasted away at PSG, because this is someone who has still won the World Cup.
How old is he now? Is he 26?
I think he might be a bit younger than that, you know.
He's 25. So he's,
25,
He's only turned 25 in December as well. So, I mean, he's still got all of his best years.
I still look at him as being younger than that as well. I don't know why, because he has been around. You know, people have been aware of him for a good 7 years now.
You talking about me or Kylian Mbappe?
No, well, possibly both. I think you've been around for nearly as long as well. But he's not wasted away at PSG, scoring in a World Cup final win, scoring a hat trick in another World Cup final. But he really should have got out of there a lot earlier than he did. It was daft what he did a couple of years ago, and it's not gone well for him either. I mean, you only have to look at how PSG have tried to rebrand themselves now, and they don't have as many superstars anymore. Whereas, was it the summer of 21? You're signing up Messi on a free. Donnarumma came in, Sergio Ramos came in. You already had Mbappe and Neymar there, and it's classic football manager fare. And yeah, it might get you the Liga title, but it's not taking them any closer to win the Champions League. I think the only time they've really done reasonably well in the Champions League was when they got to the final under Thomas Tuchel in 2020, and he was gone by the end of the year, because he was at Chelsea midway through the next season. But in regards to Mbappe going from PSG, there's obviously a void there. I know they have got existing players that suggest that they can get by without him. You've got Gonçalo Ramos and Ousmane Dembele and Randall Kolo Muani. I mean, that's a front three there and there. It's not going to cut mustard, I don't think. With
do you not think signing Rashford it would be a huge statement for those in France? I mean, you come into Manchester United, the biggest club in England, and we've talked about Rashford being the poster boy and kind of prizing him away. I feel like that could be a statement, especially after Mbappe leaves, and you kind of need to make one.
I think as far as a statement would go, I think it would probably be undermined by the circumstance of it, because I think if he were to leave United, it would be almost as much a case of INEOS pushing for him to be allowed to go as it is him wanting to leave United. PSG are one of a handful of clubs in the world who can offer Rashford parity on the salaries on at United, where he's on about 325 grand a week. If we're to take Saudi Arabian clubs out of the equation, and at this stage, I don't think any of us are necessarily anticipating Rashford moving into a retirement home at the age of 26 and just tossing off the rest of his career. That is for players who have been there and done it all to do. But as I said, in terms of it, would it be a statement? He signed a new contract last year, so he's going to be expensive. He's going to cost probably the best part of a 9-figure fee. Maybe he could command a 9-figure fee. I'd say that's doubtful on his form so far this season, but there is still time for him to pick up form and maybe get his value soaring again. But that said, I think there are a few players at United this summer who they can get, they can get decent fees for if they are proactive about selling and if they're actually very decisive about it, because he's done very, very well this season, particularly given his starting point. But there is still a compelling case to sell Scott McTominay in the summer. He's out of contract next year.
PSG to replace Mbappe?
I'm not too. I think there might be riots in Paris.
7 goals.
There might be more riots in Paris if that happened. But McTominay is clearly going to have big resale value in the summer because he's doing well this season. He's going to play at the Euros for Scotland, and his contract is running out. It's got a maximum expiry date of 2026. But you can also equally see United giving him a new long-term contract. But with these profitability and sustainability rules, there must be the temptation there for them to look at him and say, look, he's a squad player. He does well for us. He would represent a pure profit because he's come through the academy. And we could be getting upwards of £40 million for someone who's going into the last 2 years of their contract. And with Rashford, if you're looking at, I don't know, around £75 million, I think that's fair given his age, his ceiling, his marketability, all those buzzwords. Then that's a hell of a lot of money you've generated in just possibly selling 2 players. So look, I think that INEOS, it's in their interest to separate themselves from what the previous regime did. And the previous regime, whenever there was a chance of a player leaving, they'd go, oh, we need to give him a new contract. It'd be rush, give him a new contract, get the paperwork, give him a new contract. They did it with Victor Lindelof when he was 2 years into a 5-year contract. That's how ridiculous and useless these people were running Manchester United. Just because there was some reports in Mundo Deportivo about Barcelona liking the look of him, they thought we must give him a new contract. Nobody decided to tell his agent, yes, he did quite well last season, but also, do you know that last season was our worst defensive season in 40 years? You can and really earn a contract.
This is why the midweek podcast is better, Samuel. This kind of content. I know you hate that word.
The rough and ready. Yes, rough and ready. But look, I can't go through the amount of contracts that United have doled out impetuously or naively or ridiculously. I did a piece on it last month, in fact, and the more I was writing about it, I was thinking, oh, there was that name as well and that name.
Well, a lot of that was Ed Woodward as well, though, Samuel, wasn't it?
Yes,
I mean, the amount of mistakes he made was just incredible.
Yes, but also you look at, I mean, I don't agree with it at the time, but there were some United fans who thought, you know what, with Rashford, maybe we should get rid. Even last season, not many at all. It was hardly newsworthy. It has been a lot, there has been a lot of palpable discord from match goes towards Rashford this season. And I think if you were to do a poll on whether he should go, as I said, I don't know if I said it on a previous podcast, but there was a Red Issue poll on whether he should be sold, and 96% said yes. Now, those.
Can you remember which performance that was after? Because that would have a big bearing, wouldn't it?
It would have a big bearing, and I think it was unsurprisingly after the Newport game, which of course he was absent for. So his approval ratings down at that point would have been on the floor, as he was in Belfast as well that time. And of course, since then he did score a nice goal against Wolves, but his performance level, it's not been memorable. I mean, against West Ham, it's difficult to remember whether he played well or whether he played badly. At Villa Park, he was taken off, and that was completely vindicated in that McTominay scored the winning goal. I thought he was, most of the front six had an off day at the weekend, and he was one of them. So his performance level it's not like he's come back into the team, scored a brilliant goal against Wolves, and it's gone like that.
I mean, surely considering that, then, let's look at this player who's in and out, he has a fantastic season, he might score 30 goals, 25 goals in all competitions. Then he throws in an absolute stinker one year, which tends to be the pattern really with Rashford. Surely getting 75 million for a player like that, and an academy graduate, so massive for FFP, that would be a no-brainer on the face of it.
I completely agree with you on that. I don't think you can quibble about, oh no, he's worth a lot more than that. If you're getting £75 million for a player, as a Premier League club, when you've got the profitability and sustainability rules that you're mindful of at every turn, you can't turn your nose up at that. And would he go to Liga and tear it up? Yes, he probably would. But people aren't going to be watching that and saying, crikey, United have really dropped the ball with Rashford because he's pummeling Lorient this week or Nice the next week or Saint Etienne. It's a league where players of his ability are expected to go and tear it up. Mbappe is already PSG's highest scorer, has scored something like 240 odd goals there. So I think that if, as I said, I said it a few weeks ago, one of United's best ever seasons under Ferguson was 95-96, and it started with 3 very, very bold sales. Now, you could go through Ferguson's book, Kanchelskis' book, go through interviews with Hughes and Ince, and there would be a lot of revisionism. There would be a lot of inconsistencies with how they played out. But ultimately, Ferguson was sanguine with selling those 3 very senior players, not signing a single player, and trusting the class of 92 and Phil Neville coming in.
Do you generally think that would have happened in 2024? If Ferguson had made those decisions, with the way the media is, with the way the press, it's way more intensely covered now with social media, etc.
He would not have cared less about that. If he was certainly it was the right decision for the club, and also the right decision for him, because he was a tyrant, let's face it. He was a great tyrant, but he refused to entertain anyone who was ever going to get above their station. He would do it. He wouldn't hesitate about that, whether there was Twitter or no Twitter, or social media or no social media. And he had, the newspapers back.
Well, the backlash was still intense back then. Yeah,
absolutely was. And there was a phone in that summer, or there was a poll in the MEN as to whether Ferguson should go on the back of these sales, and the majority voted for him to be sacked, because these players had been sold. So that's how that gives you an idea of how much unhappiness there was among the fan base, that these three players, who were three firm fan favourites, were being sold, and also nobody was being signed to replace them.
You sometimes have to make big decisions, and Marcus Rashford could
right.
be on the end of one this summer. He certainly could. That'll be it for part 2, and we'll be back in a moment for part 3. Welcome back to part 3 of the Manchester is Red podcast. Now we'll just end with some academy bits as mentioned. I was across at Lee Sports Village on Monday night. It wasn't as cold as I thought it would be, Samuel, which was always welcome. February now, it's starting to get a bit warmer, isn't it? Because Lee is famously cold. I had my gloves on and my hat though. United won 2-1 against City, which was a great little result. City's academy having a really poor year. They're actually bottom of the division, which is bizarre because they've won the Premier League 3 years in a row, and they're having a massive tail off, which quite stark to see, but there's a few reasons for that. I was talking to our colleague Joe Bray, exactly why that's happening, but nonetheless a good performance for United, Samuel. And I thought it was just worth mentioning Tom Huddleston, because he scored the second goal. He scored the match winner, and I always laugh whenever someone goes to watch the under-21s for the first time, and they sit next to me in the press box. They go, God, look at Tom Huddleston. They watch him, and they're always amazed at the role he plays. And for anyone who doesn't know, Tom Huddleston's got a player-coach role, or kind of a coach-player role, where he plays occasional games, he coaches the team in training, and the idea is he can give on-field feedback in real time and instructions with the players and kind of relay coaches' information. And it's worked really well at United. Paul McShane was obviously the guy who had that role previously, and other clubs have copied now. So Liverpool have brought in Jay Spearing across Merseyside again, which obviously looks a bit strange to have a former player, Jay Spearing, playing for the under-21s, or seeing Tom Huddleston play for the under-21s, but it does work. You were in Carradine recently, Samuel. I've obviously done chats with Travis Binion, etc. in the last few months, but you were in to speak with Nick Cox, weren't you? So how did that go down? Because he always seems like quite an engaging talker when he speaks.
He is very engaging. He also is a dead ringer for Simon Peach, which is a lookalike that he's embraced to the point that he nicknames Simon Mirror, which is quite amusing. But he said at the end of our chat, he said, "Oh, it must be a nightmare to transcribe," and that's because he talks so much. But you'd much rather have a 50-odd minute transcript to write up than a 5-minute transcript after an interview. He's extremely engaging, very amiable, very enthusiastic. You mentioned the United Academy, and all these images flood into your mind. But even since he became Academy head in 2019, it's been a tremendous time when you look at the number of debuts they've had, the number of players who've settled into the first team, who've become undroppable in the first team, the FA Youth Cup win in 2022 as well. Some of the recruitment decisions they've made. I mean, whatever happens with Nick Cox, and I think it would be ridiculous if he was to be if his role was in jeopardy as amid these planned changes from INEOS. I'm not saying that's the case at all either, but whatever happens with him, his legacy is always going to be Garnacho, because he was the one who did the Zoom call with Garnacho and his family via a translator during lockdown.
He told a story recently, didn't he, where he had, I think it was his 2 children in the background.
Yeah, it's a great feature in the matchday programme from the West Ham game, where I think his 2 lads at the time were Sheffield United fans as well, so they didn't have as much skin in the game as they might have if they were United supporters. But they were having a bit of an argument outside, apparently over the Xbox, and he jokes them now, if that argument got any worse, it might have cost us signing Alejandro Garnacho. And he did relay that anecdote to Garnacho, and he was amused by it and actually signed the programme where the the feature is. So it was a nice touch from him. But yes, the part of that chat has already come out where we were, a couple of us were allowed into this new building. It's mainly for the women's team at Carrington, just in front of the academy building, but it does also house the academy gym in there as well, which is very impressive. There are pictures on the wall of I think it's Scott McTominay, Tom
Actually,
Heaton.
I've got a bonus pick with you, Samuel. I think your intro was exactly the same as mine. Have you been stealing from my work?
I can't say I have. I can't say I have.
Do you know what? It writes itself because it's the words on the gym wall, isn't it?
Oh,
it was
yes,
when I spoke to Adam Lawrence in December. I mean, the club have kindly invited us in for a few chats this season between me and Samuel and whatnot. Obviously, Adam Lawrence, Travis Binion, and now Nick Park. So yeah, when I went in and spoke to Adam Lawrence, I think that was my intro to the Youth Cup piece.
Yeah, it's colour like that you can't really turn your nose up at. If you're just from a journalistic perspective, if you've got the privilege of seeing something that somebody else is unable to see, then great, go with it. I mean, it made my intro at the weekend at Luton. Watching the warm up, I saw Hoyland mishit a right footer, and it still went in. And that's the way it's going for him at the moment.
It did set the tone for the afternoon.
Absolutely. So I was particularly pleased that he got a couple of goals and he was the match winner again for United. But yes, some of that chat has already come out on various things. But there's due to be another one this week that's more specific about Garnacho and him coming over to England and the makeshift surroundings that he was first that he first saw as a Manchester United player.
Oh, okay, I thought you were talking about his digs. I thought you were going to say was his digs not
no.
In Salford, quite the same as his house in Madrid.
No, his family moved over with him, but because of COVID and the bubbles and all these protocols that they had to adhere to, he had a very different experience to the daily one he now has at Carrington.
I mean, those players who came across that summer, we've mentioned them a few times, obviously Garnacho, Alvaro Fernandez, Marc Jurado, all came across from Spain in the same year. And they came across in such difficult circumstances. I mean, to a new country, you can't speak English. It's bloody locked down because of all the COVID restrictions. So to settle in and to thrive is really impressive. In terms of the actual academy graduates number then, Samuel, we're coming into an important landmark. 249 players have made their senior debuts for the club, which is a remarkable achievement. Amari Forson was the last one, Camboala before him, Dan Gore, Kobbie Mainoo, Charlie McNeil, Alejandro Garnacho. And can you name the one before that? Because it might throw you off. In terms of who made them most recently, so I'll rewind back in order, and then you can guess the one after the name I say. So, Amari Forson, Willie Camboala, Dan Gore, Kobbie Mainoo, Charlie McNeil, Alejandro Garnacho. Who was the person to make his debut before Alejandro Garnacho?
Charlie Savage and Zidane Iqbal?
It is a trick question because, I mean, it was fantastic because it was Zidane Iqbal and Charlie Savage after Tom Heaton, as producer Seb has just put into the which it was a trick question because he's celebrating there in the chat because he's not exactly a young lad, is he?
It was great at the end of that season. United they sent out some background on what a great season it had been for the academy, winning the Youth Cup, which was, and it was like, and we had these academy debutants, and it was listing all these young players, and Tom Heaton. They still named Tom Heaton. And I thought, well, in fairness, he does qualify. He's about twice the age of them all, but yeah.
Do you know, after the Carabao Cup, when the lads won the pitch and they got all the academy graduates together, and that made a really nice photo. I imagine that's up at Carrington somewhere as well on the walls.
Oh yes, yeah.
But in terms of who could be that 250th person, I think that's the conversation. I mean, Joe Hugel, he's went on loan to Burton. Sam Mather has been increasingly involved with first team training in recent weeks. He actually got sent off last night, which was interesting. But it's going to be a fantastic achievement to celebrate when that does happen.
It does. Our former boss is not happy with Sam Mather because he's been sent on loan to Rochdale, but I don't think he's actually stepped foot in Rochdale, and neither has Sam Murray so far as part of this work experience scheme that and Rochdale have had a game postponed tonight as well due to their dreadful pitch. So it remains to be seen when they'll make their National League debuts. But when Forson came on, and obviously everyone knew that was 249. People at the club were saying, well, hopefully Newport's an opportunity. And I thought at the back of my mind there were some big hitters coming back for that game, and the way Ten Hag operates, I'm not even sure there'll be a player on the bench for that game who's never played for United. And obviously, as it turned out, there wasn't. Everyone in the squad that day, apart from Altay Bayendir, had played for the club already, and Forson was the most recent one. I think some fans were maybe a little bit surprised that Hugill was allowed to go on loan, given that he has, from what I'm told, like he's made quite a good impression on Ten Hag, and of course it's great for his development that he's able to go out and get some regular football. And you obviously saw him there last night as well, where he's on loan at Burton, but he was able to come back and watch the game at Lee. I mean, yeah, it's quite admirable of him that he wants to spend a Monday evening at Lee Sports Village. I think most would do their utmost to get out of it, but he was there and very supportive. But I think he would have definitely had a chance and probably almost been a shoe-in to be that 250th player to academy player to make their debut for the first team. But now I think we may have to wait until next season. I can't really see any, as brilliantly as the under 18s are getting on in the league this season, which they're riding roughshod over just about every team. It's really, really difficult to pinpoint a player, especially where United haven't got any European commitments. It would have to be, the final game of the season would have to be a dead rubber, I think, for there to be a chance. And the way it's going, I just can't see that happening. I mean, United qualified for the Champions League last season with only one game to spare, and even in that final game against Fulham, it's got to have Fred starting because he's likely to start in the FA Cup final. Got to give Sancho minutes because he's likely to start in the FA Cup final, and he's doing quite well. It wasn't like let's just play the kids as they did 3 days before the Europa League final under Mourinho, which there was absolutely method in because it was just 3 days before the game that their season hinged on. But it would be different if United United gets to the FA Cup final and their final game of the season at Brighton is a dead rubber. I still think Ten Hag would probably not necessarily be strong-armed into just putting a player on there to get a 250th to make them the 250th player. They've also got to earn it as well. And of course, as you said last night, Sam Mather he's been quite present in first team training sessions of late. And then you look at Charlie McNeil, who wasn't starting last night and spent the first half of the season on loan at Stevenage, and he came back, so that didn't go to plan. And United said quite early on that he would be staying with them. And I just thought, well, that seems to me like he's just going to be the opposition striker in training sessions, because Ten Hag spoke about after the Villa game how McTominay is great playing for the opponents in training matches. So they must line up that way, which is of course is logical. But Charlie McNeil's not even. I'm not seeing him even in training images, and that includes last Monday.
I think he had an injury. I think he had a little knock because he was absent from the Norwich game a few weeks ago. He was absent from that squad. He played 10 minutes against Chelsea the game before that, but then he was absent. So that would explain things. He was obviously a substitute last night and he came on, which was nice to see him back. I think the thinking behind that as well is after a bad loan experience, I'm not saying it was bad, but he wasn't involved much at all. He was absent from a few squads, and with Stevenage, you just get him around the first team again, get enjoying football again, and kind of put an arm around him. I think that's the thinking, perhaps, probably.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. It would be a lot more logical for him to be in first team training sessions because he's the only other recognisable striker. He's the next one along from Højlund. So it would be completely logical for him to be involved. And of course, he did make his debut under Ten Hag against Real Sociedad last season. And this is quite a thin squad that United have at the moment, deliberately so, because there are no European commitments. And this month it's been one game per week. I know that will change next week with the cup tie against Forest on the Wednesday and then the derby on the Sunday. But that's an anomaly, really. From then on to the March internationals, it's one game a week again. And that will probably be the case for most of the rest of the season, with the odd exception, probably dependent on the odd match being postponed, if indeed they do continue to progress in the FA Cup, at which point the league fixture gets moved to a midweek slot if they get to the quarterfinal and or the semi-final. But just in terms of going back to the point as to
I said exactly what you've said to this. I'm speaking to an academy graduate, I'll not name who, for a feature soon, and he kind of mentioned that he wasn't sure if he could speak to us because the club are planning something for the 250th anniversary, and he asked me when I thought it might be, and I said, to be honest, now it'll probably be autumn later on this year for the exact reasons.
Hello from Broadhurst Park, the home of FC United. If you've joined us from the Manchester is Red podcast, thanks for listening. If you're watching us on YouTube, thanks for tuning in. We're here tonight ahead of FC United playing Vinsky, a Parisian team in the Phoenix Trophy, the third year of the Phoenix Trophy, FC United's third year here. It is a European tournament for fan-owned clubs, essentially, or clubs with a special kind of interest in Europe. So the Parisian side tonight are, essentially, they've been described to me as a Parisian #United. FC United, we all know their relevance. They've been big in this competition from the get-go as a fan-owned club. They won this competition in the first year. Last year, they were beaten, somewhat surprisingly, in the semi-finals, but still played the third and fourth place playoff in the San Siro. An incredible experience for FC United. A few hundred FC United fans in the San Siro. So an interesting and a special tournament. And while Manchester United may not be in Europe for the second half of this season, FC United still are. I'm joined now by Leo Aliotta from Brera FC, the club who founded the Phoenix Trophy. Taking a break from it this year, but Leo is still heavily involved in the organisation. We're into the third year now of the Phoenix Trophy. Leo, how have you seen its growth over the last 3 years? Is it as big as you expected it to be?
Well, I say it's exceeding the expectations, because when we started in 2020 with 8 clubs and a lot of uncertainty, because it was in the second wave of the COVID pandemic, so we were not even sure we would start. To be here after 3 years with more clubs, and in total we involved 20 clubs. I wasn't expecting this, and I'm looking to increase the number as we keep on going. So I think it's amazing.
So what we have here is a European football competition, but for teams outside of league football. But we wanted to know, how on earth did they come up with that concept, and how does it work?
Non-professional football is considered a layman version of professional football. And in a way, non-professional football clubs don't have a reference model to look up to. And the driving idea we had was that non-professional football and professional football, they look alike, just like a tiger and a cat, but they're not the same. They may pertain to the same species, but they are very different. And if you feed a cat a lot, it doesn't become a tiger, it just becomes a fat cat. So we wanted to find clubs that, just like FC United Manchester now, they are playing the 7th division in England. If they were playing the 5th, in the 9th, it wouldn't matter the identity of the club, the essence of the club. So we found the models of club very different, very diverse, because we don't want to show just a one-sided model. We're not saying like fan ownership is important, but it's not the only thing that matters, for instance. We look for clubs that are actively using their activity in non-professional football to create some added value, to create a community around them, to in a way, not just do football for football's sake. It's important to have an awareness of the importance of football, of the effect that it can have, not just on the 22 people playing, but also on the surroundings, the coaches, the managers, the fans and everything. But it shouldn't be, especially in non-professional football, all about the football result.
So the beauty of the Phoenix Trophy is that it's not just about creating the biggest, most successful football team. It's about bringing teams together who have a story, who have a community, and bringing them to compete, make friends, not millionaires. So we thought it'd be a great idea to catch up with the matchday secretary, Adrian Seddon, who can tell us a bit more about the logistics of a non-league football team competing in Europe.
It was 2021 when we were approached by the Italian team saying they had this ideal about a European Cup for semi-pro and amateur teams. We weren't allowed out the house at the time. We were under lockdown conditions. I thought they were mad at first, but the more we looked at it, the more we thought, actually, this stacks up. And as a club, FC United, since we've been formed, we've tried to go away in Europe every year because our fans were active Manchester United following fans who used to go away in Europe, and that's probably the thing that they missed the most about walking away from Old Trafford. They certainly didn't miss the sterile atmosphere that you get often at Old Trafford these days. It was the European trips. So we've had some great occasions over the years. We've played at the Olympic Stadium in Stockholm. We've played Sao Paulo. We've been to America to play Detroit. But what we hadn't done is play a competitive game. They were friendlies, and they're great. They're fun, end of season friendlies. But this offered us a structured, competitive edge to playing away in Europe. So that's what really appealed to us. Playing like-minded teams, getting to travel around Europe, learning from those clubs, making new friendships. But at the end of the day, there's a trophy to be won. As a club, we have to pay for our flights, and then it's the host club that pays for the hotels. So yeah, it's not easy. Sometimes not every player can take time off, and at times, yeah, we bought flights for players, and then they get injured a week before the game. And as a non-league team, we can't afford to suddenly pay 500 quid to change a flight at a week's notice. So our kit man, who's played Manchester League level, he always comes, and away from home, he's actually ended up on the bench at most of our away games this year. And come on, so that's the sort of thing you have to do to make it work, but we make it work.
We're doing this on a day when the Premier League have given approval for Sir Jim Ratcliffe's investment into United. That's obviously a talking point still at this club. You mentioned your own links to Manchester United. A lot of people here are Manchester United fans who moved away in 2005. Is that kind of a talking point now that Glazers are going? What's kind of the feeling around the club?
We were the original protest, I think, for what happened back in 2005. I think we still remain a relevant protest today. We're still a welcome house for Manchester United fans who don't feel they can go to Old Trafford. Now, for some, it's because they've been priced out of Old Trafford. For others, it's because they disagree with Glazers. For others, because they can't afford. They don't like the fact that games are changed at very short notice. If you're a parent now with 2 or 3 kids, can you afford to take them? There's a lot of reasons why people can't go to Old Trafford, and we remain as the alternative. But we are a protest against the Glazer regime. Every year that we play, we remind everyone that there is a protest against the Glazers. Ratcliffe has come in, but he's only bought a minority share. The Glazers still there. The Glazers aren't going anywhere, I don't think, for any time soon because of the money that they're able to make. It's not because they love Manchester United, we know that. It's because of the money they can make. So the problems we had with the Glazers remain relevant today. The debt's still there. The stadium's still falling to pieces because there's no investment in the stadium, and the Glazers are going nowhere. I think if you ask people who they would have preferred, the Qataris or the Glazers, I think it's the least bad deal as far as we're concerned for Manchester United, but it's not the best deal, it's the least bad, and I think that says a lot, and that's why we still remain relevant to Manchester United fans today.
So with all that, and the fact that you can follow a team like FC United, a non-league team, in a European competition, how does that affect younger fans? Is there an appetite for Premier League clubs, or is this club much more appealing?
I've always supported him since I was really young. My dad was a massive fan, and so my mum was a quite a big fan, so I've always followed them. Yeah, there's never really temptation to watch United because you can always watch that on TV, but you feel like you're a part of it, and you feel like you're an actual supporter instead of being a person who's like owned by the Glazers or whoever owns Man City and things.
I think there's a tactileness to it. There's a kind of texture to it. You come to these grounds, and I know most people by face in this place by now. There's something familiar to that. It's visceral. The atmosphere is obviously right on top of the pitch, and there's a community to it as well. And people doing things for the right reasons, and people doing things because they can do it, which I guess is the beauty of the Phoenix Trophy as well. But a real kind of DIY punk ethos of we don't like the way it's being done elsewhere, so just do it ourselves.
And that is the beauty of non-league football. It's punky, it's community driven, everybody mucks in and we just get on with it and do it ourselves. And to be able to support a team and go into a European competition must be so mouth-watering for local supporters. And it must attract more supporters as well, seeing foreign teams coming here to Manchester, away from the Giants, as well as being able to travel to Europe. But before we finish, we wanted to speak to the manager. We wanted to hear, what is it like managing a team at non-league, especially when you find out you're going to be competing in Europe?
I mean, is it still a pinch yourself moment when you lead an FC United to Poland, when you go into these places and play in these games? It's pretty surreal still, isn't it?
I mean, I just literally goosebumps run up my back when you said it then, and whether or not you've got to, when you talk rounding off the place we've been to, Poland, Rimini, Belgium, Milan, playing the San Siro, Paris, it's coming up, Krakow, it's staggering that some of these places that we get the opportunity to visit as non-league footballers, and when we saw the draw come out, and two places that I was desperate to go to was Krakow and Paris. We get them both in our group, so yes, we're going to entertain the Paris side tonight, but then we get the opportunity to go out there and see the culture and experience the culture, but also give a chance for our fans to go and travel to places that they've been before in European football with Manchester United, but now they're doing it for an FC United, so you never take it for granted. It's a spectacular competition, and the amount of funding that's going into it now, the amount of the exposure that he's getting, it's incredible. I'll never forget when Adrian said to me, how would you fancy managing FC United across Europe? And I didn't know what to expect, and now we're in our third year, and we're going to be into our fourth year next year, so it's a unique opportunity, and one that I'm immensely proud of doing. We're not just here to make up numbers. The competition's about making friends, not millionaires, celebrating fan-owned football, but it's also, when you cross that white line, about wanting to win. And we didn't take it lightly, not winning the competition last year. We don't have a divine right, but this year we want to come back with a bang and win it.
Charlie Munro to the edge of the box. Munro! 4-1. And all of a sudden, the scoreline rather flatters FC.
That's full time at Broadhurst Park. FC United 4-1 winners against Vinsky from Paris in the Fenex Trophy. The European competition about making friends off the pitch, but it seems no one told the players. A very physical, very entertaining game here tonight. As much entertainment as the Champions League probably had to offer. FC United 1-0 down at half-time. Savinsky's only attack eventually pulled it back to 1-1. Two players sent off, one for either side after the goal, for a bit of scrapping in the goal mouth. Vinsky, incredibly physical team. Their coaching staff complained about virtually every decision. Somehow managed to keep 10 men onto the pitch in the end. FC United missed a penalty at 1-1 with 5 or 6 minutes to go and still ran out 4-1 winners in the end. I think the fitness and the physicality sort of showed in the end, and Vinsky ran out of legs, but a very entertaining game. 2 wins from 2 for FC United in the group. They've got the Dragoons from Krakow here in a couple of weeks, and then a return trip to Paris. So stay across FC United social channels for updates from the Fenex Trophy. Stay across our social media channels for more features like this. Do let us know in the comments what you made of this. If you're tempted to come and attend an FC United game, a Fenex Trophy game. And that's all for now. We'll hand you back to the studio, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you very much for your time, Samuel. Rough and ready.
Thank you, Stephen.
And I hope the listeners have enjoyed this podcast. If you have, leave her a 5-star review. And me and Samuel will be back on Friday later in the week. Take care.